Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. You're listening to the Missing 411 series. This is episode 2, 18th and 19th century. Strange disappearances. Bizarre vanishings of individuals in the 18th and 19th centuries. Strange disappearances are, of course, nothing new, and we'll be taking a look at some of the most baffling in centuries since past. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also support MINDSHOCK right here on YouTube by becoming a YouTube member for exclusive access to streams and chats. Like and share the podcast. Let's bring logic and reason back to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. And also make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow a device to have those notifications come through. And any questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So let's go over another article here on how this is all connected. MysteriousUniverse.org has a certain reputation for the bizarre and unsolved, paranormal, supernatural, glitches in the matrix, so to speak. I'm going to read an article here from Brent Swanser, posted November 20th, 2015, Bizarre Cases of People Who Spontaneously Cease to Exist. Mysterious disappearances aren't new. For whatever reasons, some people just seem to vanish without a trace, never to be seen again. Yet, as bizarre as these cases may be, there seems to be an even stranger type of disappearance out there. People who vanish in full view of others, under circumstances where it seems impossible that they could have even gone far, let alone totally disappeared. These are the cases in which people were there one moment and gone the next, seeming to have just literally faded from existence, leaving us baffled and perhaps even questioning what we think we know about this mysterious world of ours. Let's take a look at the history of some of the more curious accounts of these spontaneous vanishings of people who, by all indications, seem to have just ceased to exist. One of the earliest well-known accounts of people spontaneously vanishing comes from back in the 1700s. Sometime in the 1760s, in the English town of Shepton Mallet, there lived an elderly man in his 70s by the name of Owen Parfitt. Crippled with disease, Parfitt was said to be unable to get around on his own, instead spending his days either bedridden or sitting outside by the doorway to his home where he lived with his sister. According to the story, one day, old Owen was sitting in his usual spot by the door, where his sister, also his primary caretaker, had been keeping an eye on him as usual. On this day, the weather was rather chilly, and Owen had covered himself with a coat, but there were no indications that anything was amiss, or that this day was any different from the many other times Owen had sat outside. When his sister went to move him, she found that only the coat remained, where Owen had been sitting just moments before. Since he was unable to walk on his own, she had first thought that perhaps a neighbor had moved him inside for her, as was sometimes the case. But the old man was nowhere to be found, and the neighbors denied having moved him, although they had seen him sitting there all day. In fact, there were many witnesses about on that day, yet no one had seen anything unusual at all. Owen's sister searched the area, but Owen was nowhere to be found, and it was baffling that he could have gotten far so soon in front of so many people and with the inability to walk. A search was launched by authorities, but no trace of Owen Parfitt was ever found, leading to the popular legend at the time that the devil had come for him as a payment for a pact they had made. What kind of pact? His disappearance remains a mystery to this day. So here's a little bit more backstory. On historicmysteries.com, there's a little article on Owen Parfitt. So this one states that he was in his 60s. And that his wild living had caught up with him. And apparently he told tales of his youth that featured piracy, great battles, and numerous women. Most people were skeptical of his stories, and he undoubtedly knew that, but it never stopped him from recounting his glory days nonetheless. The date is sketchy. Some sources claim the following took place in June of 1763, while others place it in 1768. Regardless, we do know that on a warm evening, Parfitt wanted to sit outside. Due to his virtual immobility, he needed the assistance of his sister and a neighbor to carry him out into a chair on the front porch. When his sister returned into the house, Owen was sitting placidly in the chair. Across the road, a very short distance away, several farm workers were laboring within easy earshot of Owen. Certainly, if someone approached him where he sat on the porch, somebody would have seen something, but nobody saw a thing. A storm was coming that evening, and so Owen's sister came out onto the porch to bring him back inside. But he was no longer in the chair. Knowing that he could not have moved anywhere by himself, she asked the farm workers if they saw someone come get him, but none of them had. Panicking, the sister enlisted the help of the farm workers and neighbors to search the area. It wasn't possible Owen could have left on his own, so it would seem he would be easily found. Impossibly, they never found a trace of the crippled man. Over time, neighbors passed along tales about what had happened to him, including that he'd been taken by the devil, or that pirates carried him off in order to get him to tell the location of a buried treasure. Well, keep in mind, supposedly there were farm workers within earshot. Owen's incredible disappearance was never solved and became a popular piece of local lore. The story would fade but became local news again in 1813 when some routine construction in Shepton Mallet unearthed a human skeleton. Everyone jumped to the conclusion that it must be Owen's remains, and theories were put forward on how Owen's body had come to such an undignified end. The medical community nipped the gossip in the bud, however, when it was stated that the skeleton was that of a young female. Another episode of construction in the area in 1933 shed no new light on Owen's fate. He remains one of Southwest England's most intriguing mysteries. I'm kind of curious about his supposed deal with the devil. On MysteriousUniverse.org, there's another article by Brent Swancer as well. This one is more recent, June 25th, 2021. With a little bit more backstory, Owen grew up learning to sew and served as an apprentice to his father, who was a tailor. He was apparently very skilled at it, shaping up to be a fine tailor, but then one day, Owen Parfitt, who at the time had a promising future ahead of him, simply vanished without a trace from his home. The whole town looked for the young man, but he was nowhere to be seen, and there had been no note left behind to tell where he had gone. Rumors at the time were that he had listed in the king's service to go off on adventures to faraway lands, as there were some who claimed he had never been happy in a routine life of being a tailor and had yearned for something more. However, no one knew, and the years went by with no sign of him. Then decades. Owen's parents would pass away without ever knowing what happened to him, and then one day in the early 1760s, when he was a little more than a fading memory, an old man walked into town claiming to be the long-lost Owen Parfitt. The elderly man just came waltzing in as if nothing had ever happened, and although no one could recognize him as being who he said he was, his older sister Mary certainly did, and was overjoyed at such a sudden reunion with the brother she had long given up for dead. When asked where he had been all those years, Owen had quite the story to tell. He claimed that, just as everyone had originally suspected, he had gone off on an adventure to see the world, seeing far-off colonies, battling pirates, and fighting in wars. Whether these were tall tales or not, he held people captivated by his stories of high adventure in faraway lands. When asked why he had returned, he explained that he was too old to do such things anymore, and that he hoped to now lead a quiet, settled life and finally become the tailor his dead father had always wanted him to be. For a few years, Owen pursued life as a tailor, living with his sister and living a peaceful, content life. But his physical health began to deteriorate rapidly. His body became riddled with rheumatism, which got worse year by year until he could only hobble about on a cane, and it finally got to the point where he could barely walk at all. His sister cared for him as much as she could, but she was even older than he was and had trouble taking care of him. She decided to enlist the help of a young woman who lived next door by the name of Suzanne Snook to help her care for her brother and take away some of her burden. Most of the time, they had to carry the practically bedridden Owen from place to place, as although he was still mentally sharp, his legs just didn't work anymore. One of Owen's favorite things to do was to sit in his chair outside on the front porch in the late afternoon, watching the sunset and the world go by, talking to passerbys, and going on about his glory days to anyone who would listen. Every day, if the weather was good, Susanna and Mary would carry Owen out to his usual chair, leave him there, and then bring him back in when the sun dipped below the horizon. It was all completely routine for them, so when they put him out there one afternoon in 1768, there was no reason to think it would be any different. But Owen was about to pull his second vanishing in his life, and this time it would be very mysterious indeed. On this afternoon, Owen sat out there as usual, wrapped in a blanket and wearing a thick coat because it was cold that day, and after he had been placed outside, Susanna went back to her cottage a short way away, and Mary went about her house chores. They would both occasionally look out to the porch to see him sitting out there contentedly, sometimes talking to people passing by, but usually staring out into the distance daydreaming, perhaps reliving his life of adventure in his mind. As sunset approached, a storm began rolling in, with black clouds blotting out the sun and thunder rumbling in the distance. Mary decided it was time to take Owen inside, but when she went out to get him, she was surprised to see that Owen's chair was empty, with only the coat remaining where Owen had been sitting just moments before. Since he was unable to walk on his own, she at first thought that perhaps a neighbor had moved him inside for her, as was sometimes the case, but the old man was nowhere to be found. So we went over that again. Nobody saw or heard anything unusual. Owen's house was not in a particularly rural area and was actually on a turnpike road not far from the town center. There were many witnesses about on that day, yet no one had seen anything unusual or knew where he had gotten to. So, the rumors were that he was taken by supernatural forces, the devil had come for payment on some sinister pact they had made, and there were also rumors that Owen had been involved in witchcraft and black magic. There was an article in the Somerset County Herald. It said this: the helpless man had completely vanished, leaving the great coat hanging on the back of his chair. The general opinion was that he had been spirited away by supernatural means, and to add to the terror of the superstitious neighbors, a terrible storm with lightning and thunder suddenly burst over Board Cross. A most exhaustive search was made for him, living or dead. Every wood, ditch, pond, and well for miles around was searched, but in vain. It wasn't long before articles and headlines like this were all over the papers, and much speculation was brewing. Besides the sensational supernatural explanations, another idea was that he had been kidnapped or even murdered. But how could anyone manage to pull that off in broad daylight and with so many witnesses walking around without anyone noticing? One idea was that Owen's sister Mary had been the one to do it, as she had been in a position to grab him and then cover it all up with a fantastical story of him disappearing into thin air. But not only was there no evidence of this, but she was no spring chicken herself, at the time nearly 90 years old. Also, there did not seem to be any reason why anyone would want this elderly, crippled man dead, especially his own sister, who by all accounts had a loving relationship with her brother. Unless, of course, she found out he wasn't her brother? He had no money, no enemies that anyone knew of, so it could have been someone from his mysterious past coming after him for some wrong he had done. Who knows? Yet another theory was that Owen had been lying all along and that he was actually able to walk. There was even a witness who said they had seen him fleeing the area shortly after his vanishing, but why would he fake being a crippled, bedridden old man for years on end? What would he have to gain from this? No trace of Owen Parfitt or any evidence of one theory or another was ever found. And then, of course, there was the skeleton found 150 yards from the Parfitt's cottage in 1813. Everyone thought it was him, but then it was actually a female skeleton. And I don't know they solved that one either, so they don't know who the female skeleton belonged to either. Owen Parfitt's strange vanishing became almost legendary, even influencing the work of the Sherlock Holmes author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who said of it, quote, "It forms one of the most piquant mysteries which ever came before the British public," end quote. So the first thing that strikes, is it coincidental that this was his second disappearance in his lifetime? Now, of course, a young man running off to see the world, I mean, that's quite common, especially in those days. But the fact that it happened again to an old man who was crippled, that is not so common. That is quite curious indeed, but my first thought is that he also, other than the sister possibly finding out that he wasn't really her brother, because he's coming back all these decades later, I mean, would she be able to recognize him? I mean, I'm assuming he must have known things, like for her to just believe that outright, or things came up in conversation that would have bolstered the sister's belief that this was truly her brother, but that's one possibility. But the other possibility that jumps out at me more is the locals that he was talking to and telling of his tall tales. Did he simply get tired of his life? Did he want someone to kill him or whatever, to put him out of his misery if he's really crippled? Or did he want one final adventure and he just told someone there was some final treasure that he was hoping to get if they would just carry him out? Now, were there a lot of horses and carriage? It says it's next to a turnpike, whatever that means in the 1700s. I'm assuming that means traffic, horse and carriage maybe? Is it possible someone snuck him into the carriage? I mean, there's no way. I mean, there were workers within earshot, and the neighbor kept an eye on him here and there, and so did his sister between chores. But by all accounts, he wasn't being watched 24/7 every second while he was sitting there. So is it possible he simply convinced someone to put him in a carriage? And off they went for one final adventure. Either way, continuing with the Missing 411 article here. Other equally baffling cases continued into the 1800s. On the night of November 25th, 1809, a British diplomat by the name of Benjamin Bathurst was on his way to Berlin in order to get back to London after an important trip to Vienna. On the way, Bathurst made a stop at the town of Perleberg in order to get new horses and to have a meal. When the horses were ready, and he had finished eating his dinner, Bathurst excused himself and told his assistants he would go out and wait in the carriage so that they could continue on their trip. The diplomat then went out to the carriage, and the assistant followed moments after, yet when the door to the carriage opened, Bathurst wasn't there. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen, and there was no sign of where he could have gone, even though he had been there just seconds before. Considering his prominence as a diplomat, a massive search was immediately put together, complete with dogs scouring the woods, house-to-house searches, and thorough dragging of a nearby river, Stepnitz, but nothing could be found. After several more searches, a coat thought to have belonged to Bathurst was found in a restroom, and some boots were found in the surrounding wilderness. But it was not clear whether they actually belonged to the missing man or not. At the time, the region was ravaged by war due to the rampaging Napoleon Bonaparte, and Bathurst's wife thought the French had kidnapped her husband. But Bonaparte himself reportedly denied having any knowledge of such a thing, and even aided in the search efforts. Wow, this is a historical mystery. Then again, even if he was responsible, would he not deny it and help in the search efforts to make it look like he wasn't responsible? Then again, why would he go through that trouble in the first place to deny it? I mean, he's Napoleon Bonaparte, so I don't know, it's kind of weird. In the end, no definitive trace of Bathurst would ever be found, and he was never seen again, seemingly erased from existence. Now, the first thing that jumps out at me, he's a diplomat. There's some international intrigue at play here. Would someone want to kill him or kidnap him? Or, I mean, it's possible. Would he possibly even himself want to defect? I mean, I don't know. Somebody probably just grabbed him. Now, again, I don't have all the details. This isn't the modern era. We don't have CCTV security footage. But is it possible someone was lying in wait in the shadows and just grabbed him off? So let's go through the official story regarding Benjamin Bathurst. So this is right from Wiki. Born March 18th, 1784, death 1809 question mark. This was a British diplomatic envoy who had disappeared in Prussia during the Napoleonic Wars. He was the third son of Henry Bathurst, Bishop of Norwich. His sister was the poet Caroline de Crespigny. Bathurst disappeared on or about November 25, 1809, sparking much debate and speculation about his ultimate fate, especially in science fiction stories based on a widespread belief, fostered by secondary sources, that his disappearance was a case of particularly sudden, perhaps supernatural, vanishing. Recent research suggests the circumstances of Bathurst's disappearance was wildly embellished and that he was almost certainly murdered. Almost certainly? So, not certainly. Career: Bathurst entered the diplomatic service at an early age and was promoted to the post of Secretary of the British Legation at Livorno. In 1805, he married Phillida Call, daughter of Sir John Call, a Cornish landowner and baronet. In 1809, Bathurst was dispatched to Vienna as an envoy by his relative Henry Bathurst, pro tempore Secretary for Foreign Affairs. His mission was to assist in the reconstruction of the alliance between the United Kingdom and Austria, and to encourage Austrian Emperor Francis I to declare war on France, which the emperor did in April. However, the Austrians were forced to abandon Vienna to the French forces and eventually sued for peace after they were badly defeated by the French at the Battle of Wagram in July 1809. Bathurst was promptly recalled to London and decided that the safest route was to travel north and take ship from Hamburg, Prussia. Disappearance. On November 25th, 1809, Bathurst and his German courier, Herr Kraus, who were traveling by Shay under the aliases of Baron de Koch and Fischer, respectively stopped at the town of Perleberg, west of Berlin. After ordering fresh horses at the post house, Bathurst and Kraus walked to a nearby inn, the White Swan. After ordering an early dinner, Bathurst is said to have spent several hours writing in a small room set aside for him at the inn. The travelers' departure was delayed, and it was not until 9 p.m. that they were told that the horses were about to be harnessed to their carriage. Bathurst immediately left his room, followed shortly after by Kraus, who was surprised to find Bathurst was not in the shay when he reached it, and indeed was nowhere to be found. Also, I wonder if the people that were gathering the horses, if they had something to do with this because of the delay. Huh. But it says the traveler's departure, was delayed, and it was not until 9 p.m. So it's unclear what the real delay was. Was it the people preparing the horses, or was it something else? Bathurst's disappearance did not create much excitement at the time, since the country was infested with bandits, stragglers from Napoleon's army, and German revolutionaries. Additionally, murders and robberies were so common that the loss of one commercial traveler, which Bathurst was traveling as, because of course he was using an alias, was barely noticed, especially since at the time there were hardly any legal authorities in Prussia. So here's the other thing, though. If he's traveling under aliases, was this really just a straight-up mugging and they didn't know who he was? News of the disappearance did not reach England for some weeks until Kraus managed to reach Hamburg and take ship for England. In December, Bathurst's father, Henry Bathurst, the Bishop of Norwich, received a summons from Foreign Secretary Richard Wellesley to attend him at Apsley House, where Wesley informed the bishop of his son's disappearance. Bathurst's wife, Philida, immediately left for Prussia to search for her husband, accompanied by the explorer Heinrich Röntgen. They arrived at Perleberg to find the authorities had been looking into the affair and that a Captain von Klitzing had been put in charge of the investigation. After Captain Klitzing was notified of Bathurst's disappearance, he took immediate steps to mobilize his troops and conducted a vigorous search, apparently working on the initial assumption that the missing man had vanished of his own accord. So this is nothing new, because in modern missing persons cases, a lot of investigators think that off the bat right away as well. On the 26th, the river Stepanitz was dragged, and the civilian officials ordered a second search of the village. Yeah, they're going all out on this search here in 1809. This is impressive. They're dragging a river in 1809 for one guy. On November 27th, 1809, Bathurst's valuable fur coat worth 200 or 300 Prussian thalers was discovered hidden in an outhouse owned by a family named Schmidt. Then, on December 16th, 2 old women out scavenging in the woods near Quitzow, 3 miles north of Perleberg, came across Bathurst's pantaloons. Investigation quickly revealed that one August Schmidt had been working as a hostler, not hustler, but a hostler with an O. And so this is a stableman to take care of the horses, as I speculated earlier. So Schmidt was working as a hostler in the courtyard of the White Swan on the night Bathurst disappeared, and that his mother, who also worked at the inn, had taken the Englishman's coat. Frau Kestern, a woman employed at the German coffee house, testified years later that immediately after Bathurst had visited the establishment, August had come in, asked where the visitor had gone, then hastened after him, and she's supposed to have taken some opportunity to destroy him. Wow, that's an interesting citation there. Someone's going to destroy him. This is from 40 Times, March 27th, 2016. Well, it looks like it originally might have been published summer 1990. Huh. But here's the thing, though. If there was some kind of struggle and the coat was left behind, they could have simply taken that nice coat. So that doesn't mean they're responsible for his disappearance per se. A reward of 500 thalers was offered for any news, and money was paid to members of the local police to expedite matters. This, however, caused the waters to be muddied, as many false reports and offers of information were made by people seeking a share of the reward. In March, Mrs. Bathurst had the entire area of Perleberg searched at vast expense, which included the use of trained dogs, but her efforts were to no avail. She then traveled to Berlin and Paris under special safe conduct, since Britain and France were at war, to see Napoleon himself, hoping to obtain from him some account of her husband's fate. However, when she was received by Napoleon, he declared his ignorance of the affair and offered his assistance. Contemporary press reports, January 1810, the English and French press had become aware of Bathurst's disappearance and had begun to discuss it. Things moved slow back in those days. The Times published a piece in January 1810, which subsequently appeared in other English newspapers. There is too much reason to fear that the account of the death of Mr. Bathurst, late envoy to the Emperor of Austria, inserted in a Paris journal, is correct as to the principal fact. It was stated as an article of Berlin News of the date of December 10th that Mr. Bathurst had evinced symptoms of insanity on his journey through the city, and that he had subsequently fallen by his own hand in the vicinity of Perleberg. Information, however, has been received within these few days which forcibly tends to fix the guilt of Mr. Bathurst's death or disappearance on the French government. It appears that Mr. Bathurst left Berlin with passports from the Prussian government and in excellent health both of mind and body. He was to proceed to Hamburg, but Hamburg he never reached. At some town near the French territories, he was seized, as is supposed, by a party of French soldiers. What happened afterwards is not accurately known. His pantaloons had been found near the town where he was seized, and a letter in them to his wife, but nothing else. The Prussian government, upon receiving the intelligence, evinced the deepest regret and offered a large reward for the discovery of his body. No success, however, has attended the offer. The French government was agitated by the accusation that they had kidnapped or murdered Bathurst, and replied in their official journal, Le Moniteur Universel, England alone among all civilized nations has renewed the example of paying assassins and encouraging crimes. It appears by accounts from Berlin that Mr. Bathurst was deranged in his mind. This is the custom of the British cabinet, to give their diplomatic missions to the most foolish and senseless persons the nation produces. This is kind of cold. The English diplomat corps is the only one in which examples of madness are common. That was January 29th. What a response by the French government. 1852 discovery. On April 15th, 1852, during the demolition of a house on the Hamburg Road in Perleberg, located 300 paces from the White Swan, a skeleton was discovered under the threshold of the stable. The back of the skull showed a fracture as though from the blow of a heavy instrument. All of the upper teeth were perfect, but one of the lower molars showed signs of having been removed by a dentist. The owner of the house, a mason named Kaiserwetter, had purchased the house in 1834 from Christian Mertens, who had been a serving man at the White Swan during the period when Bathurst disappeared. Bathurst's sister, Mrs. Thistlethwaite, traveled to Perleberg, but could not conclusively say whether or not the skull belonged to her brother. I mean, were they able to at least determine whether it was an adult male's skeleton or not? Shouldn't they be able to determine that? Recent investigation. A detailed investigation conducted by writer Mike Dash, first published in 40 Times in 1990, concluded that the alleged mysterious details of the Bathurst disappearance had been greatly exaggerated over the years, and that Bathurst was almost certainly murdered. Almost certainly, so not certainly. So that's the official narrative. So on historicmysteries.com, there's an interesting write-up here. Benjamin Bathurst's Disappearance of a British Envoy by Doug McGowan. And I don't see a date here. But I will go through this article. Benjamin Bathurst, a minor British diplomat, was to discover how volatile the European situation really was in 1809. Hazardous travel. It was not a good year for traveling in Europe. Various countries were declaring war on each other, and then later perhaps convincing former enemies to take sides against someone else. This sounds like a bunch of middle schoolers. In an attempt to return safely to Britain, Bathurst and an attendant were traveling under the assumed names of Baron de Kosch and Feischer on November 25th, 1809, at which time they arrived in Perleberg near Berlin. Bathurst requested that fresh horses be obtained for his shay, and then Bathurst and the attendant retired to a local inn called the White Swan. At the inn, Bathurst dined. Afterward, he retired to a side room where he wrote out some correspondence and, curiously, hastily burned other pieces of paper in the room's fireplace. Perhaps he decided it would be safer to travel relatively unseen after dark, because at 9 p.m., Bathurst and his attendant were told that the new horses were ready and the shay could go at any time. So what were these other accounts of... there was some kind of delay? Bathurst left the inn first. He was followed closely by his attendant. Someone at the inn may have watched the couple approach their shay. Instead of going into the shade from the side closet to the inn, Bathurst walked toward the front of the horses in order to go around them and get into the shay at the far side. Bathurst's attendant followed him. Whoa, seriously? Wait, so the attendant was actually walking with him? He was followed closely? So he disappeared while walking around the actual shay? Within a second? Now, if that's what happened, now I know why I made the missing 411, because... Wow, okay, let's continue here. Bathurst disappeared. Upon reaching the far side of the coach seconds later, the attendant saw no sign of Bathurst. Bathurst was not in the shay, nor was he anywhere around it. The attendant and local men searched the area for an hour, but there was no trace. Bathurst had vanished. So, if that's all true, then one would obviously have to investigate his attendant here, the attendant, because he would be technically the last person to see him alive. Being a time before wire communications and due to the various battles springing up all over Europe, it would take several weeks for news of Bathurst's disappearance to reach England. And also, can the attendant verify whether he had his coat on or not? Clues and searches. On November 26, 1809, the Perleberg authorities searched the nearby river for clues but came up empty. During a house-to-house search the following day, Bathurst's heavy coat was found in the outhouse of a local family named Schmidt. And this guy did work at the White Swan. On December 16, 1809, two women in some woods near Perleberg found Bathurst's pants. The pants had 2 bullet holes in them, although there was no blood. This suggests that the bullets had been fired through the pants after they were removed from Bathurst's body. Bathurst's wife traveled to Perleberg, but found no clues to the whereabouts of her husband. She offered a large reward for info about the disappearance. This, unfortunately, caused numerous people to come forward with misinformation in order to get the reward. Leading theory. The most commonly held belief nowadays is that Bathurst fell among thieves. He was murdered for his fine coat and the money he had on him. The fact that a member of the Schmidt family worked as a servant at the White Swan leads credence to this theory, although some postulate that Bathurst may have forgotten his coat in his hurry to leave the inn, and Schmidt took the coat after Bathurst had vanished. All search efforts were for naught. The ultimate fate of Benjamin Bathurst is unknown. So how could he fall to thieves if his attendant is right there around the shay? So how big is the shay? It's not that big. I mean, is it a 2-person or a 4-person carriage or whatever? I mean, for him to disappear right in front of this guy's eyes, and again, the attendant should have been asked if he had his coat on him or not, because that would be critical information here. So let's go to Reddit, Unresolved Mysteries, for this write-up here, Disappearance of British Diplomat Benjamin Bathurst. Okay, they go over his background info. He supposedly he was instrumental in the mobilization of the Austrian army in 1809. He feared for his life, afraid that French agents would exact swift revenge. I mean, that's kind of an interesting point that was not gone over in these other write-ups. So they arrived November 25th, ordered fresh horses, sought out the local garrison to speak with their commander about organizing protection. Yeah, there's a lot of additional details here in this Unresolved Mysteries write-up. So he arrived in Perleberg near Berlin. Having arrived, it is said he ordered fresh horses and then sought out the local garrison to speak with their commander about organizing protection. So if this garrison commander is compromised, what does that mean? Having been granted a pair of soldiers to stand guard at his room at the White Swan, he retired for several hours with a traveling companion. Around 9 p.m. that evening, he was informed new horses were ready for his carriage, and he left the room to go down and inspect them. By the time his companion arrived, Benjamin Bathurst was gone. Several individuals present in the stables at the time claimed that Bathurst had walked around behind the horses and vanished. Here's the thing, though. If these stable hands were in on it, why would they make something up so outlandish? Oh, he just vanished into thin air in the middle of the street. They probably would have said we never saw him. I don't know. I mean, this is kind of weird. Also, I'm assuming here, so his companion didn't walk directly behind him? I mean, these are different accounts here. Over the years, several searches were carried out, and despite finding several of Bathurst's belongings, a coat and his pantaloons, the man himself was never found. In 1852, a skeleton with a fractured skull was found beneath the stables at a house near the White Swan. This skeleton was never identified. So if it was searched, there's no blood or anything around the shay either? So was he just nabbed and not killed and then killed elsewhere? And then apparently the pants had no blood on them when they were found. And I'm assuming the coat didn't either, otherwise they would have mentioned that there was blood. So some responses here. Bathurst is one of these classic mysteries that gets a lot of attention, but an examination seems thin. He's traveling in a war zone rich with bandits and revolutionaries. The popular version says that he stepped behind his horses and vanished, which is not at all what happened. It's not at all clear when and where he disappeared. I mean, unless the stable hands reportedly reported this. Again, I don't know how that would have been verified, especially with this much time passed. His coat is found in the possession of a hotel employee. Witnesses testify that the hotel staff are following him. I don't know where. I did not see that anywhere. And then some people actually postulate there's some kind of time travel or interdimensional rip going on. So, okay, that is the story of Benjamin Bathurst. We examined a few different theories. I mean, there's something. It is really strange, but he did speak to the garrison. So if the garrison commander was compromised, he could have given the tip-off that this guy was there. And then French agents could have done the rest and then paid off everyone else to say they didn't see anything. I mean, does that make sense? The skeleton's kind of weird, because if they were going to take him and kill him and torture him, it seems unlikely that they would bury him under a house right there. They would take him elsewhere. So, again, if that skeleton's never been identified, that could easily be somebody else. So, going back to this Missing 411 article on Mysterious Universe, sometimes not only did the person disappear, but they did so right before the eyes of witnesses, literally fading away in plain sight. Just a few years after Bathurst's odd case, another even more bizarre disappearance was to occur. In 1815, at a Prussian prison at Weichslamund, a prisoner by the name of Diderici was doing a 10-year sentence for assuming the identity of his dead employer by dressing up in his clothes and a wig and trying to withdraw a large amount of money after the man had died of a stroke. Allegedly, one day, Diderici was being led through the exercise yard in chains in a line of other prisoners when something very odd began to happen. According to other prisoners, Diderici began to literally fade away, his body gradually becoming transparent and immaterial until finally his empty manacles and chains clattered to the ground as baffled prisoners and guards looked on. An inquiry into the case would turn up nearly 30 eyewitness accounts from both convicts and guards that reported the exact same thing, that Diderici had become slowly invisible until he was simply not there anymore. Puzzled by the case, the authorities would end up brushing the whole affair under the carpet, closing the case, and then proclaiming it an act of God. Diderici would never be seen again. That's really weird, because in a lot of these cases, even with a lot of witnesses, they simply report an instant vanishing. I mean, this is a slow fade out. I mean, this is kind of weird. So let's go to the Unresolved Mysteries Wiki. Diderici, last name unrevealed. No known nicknames. Location Danzig, Prussia. Now modern-day Poland, 1815. And supposedly the prison still stands today. There's a photo of it here on the Unresolved Wiki. Details: Diderici was once the valet to Captain Fritz Alswanger of the Prussian army. After the general died, Diderici assumed the man's identity to assume a life of wealth and leisure. After he was caught and arrested, he was imprisoned in Weisschlamunde prison in Danzig. According to legend, Diderici was able to escape in 1815 by picking the lock to the chains on his feet and vanish under a cover of mist and fog. He was never seen again. Huh. So, was this embellished on how he disappeared in front of all these witnesses, or was there simply a fog? How foggy was it? Here's another article from the Con L blog by Conspirator, July 30th, 2021. Vanishing prisoner Diderici mystery solved? ? Diderichi's story. There is a strange mystery of a man who seemingly vanished into thin air while in the confines of heavy iron shackles in a prison yard. This tale is from 1815 and is about Diderici, who was the valet of Captain Fritz Alswanger, a knight of the Legion of Honor in the Prussian army and a very well-known and respected man. After the captain's sudden demise due to a stroke, Diderici assumed the identity of his master and continued living with all of his wealth and grandeur. While the exact story is not known and reports vary, many state this went on for quite a while until Diderici was arrested in relation to a stolen ring. Many people denied that the captain would be involved, but sometime later, when he was asked to defend himself against this crime in front of many of the captain's known officials, Diderici admitted to the theft as well as shocked the crowd by telling everyone who he truly was. So they didn't recognize him, all these people, and knew the captain? Another version of the story claims that Diderici dressed up in his master's clothes and wore a wig to try and withdraw funds from his master's bank account. According to this story, he was caught in the bank and arrested immediately. After his being caught, Diderici was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment in the Weisschlamunde prison in Danzig. While the exact date isn't known, sometime in the same year, he was out in the exercise yard of the prison, walking in a line with other shackled prisoners for their daily exercise. Suddenly, in the view of many other prisoners and guards, Diderici began to fade away in a sort of foggy mist until he completely disappeared. According to interviews with prisoners and guards, it was discovered that within seconds, Diderici began to fade and totally became invisible, after which his iron chains clanked to the ground. This was obviously baffling, so it was suspected that the guards had been bribed by Diderici and then helped him escape somehow. But after multiple interviews and investigation, this was deemed impossible due to the number of eyewitnesses and their stories being identical. After this, Diderici vanished and was never seen again. Now, while that was the age-old story, recently a very valid theory has come to light, and it seems that the mystery has been solved. The theory states that Diderici did exist and he did escape, but no vanishing or anything paranormal ever happened, and I'll cover it below. Theory solution. While this theory doesn't involve any disappearing magically, there was an actual Diderici. He was a prisoner serving a sentence in the Weisschlamunde prison in Poland, and just as this tale goes, he was also there for impersonating his master. The prison itself was originally controlled by Prussians, but had been captured by the French under Napoleon's attempt to take over Europe. The prisoner, Diderici, was forced to wear heavy iron shackles constantly as a safety measure because he had already attempted to escape in the past. After all this, he eventually disappeared, but not in quite the same interesting manner as described in the original mystery. Instead of in 1815, Diderici disappeared from the prison between 1812 and 1813. It was during this time that the prison's ownership was returned to the Prussians, which led to a change in the whole staff. One day, during a routine roll check, Diderici's name was found to have the word missing written next to it. The in-charge asked the former commandant about where Diderici was, and the commandant guessed that the prisoner had probably jumped into the adjacent Vistula River while trying to escape the prison via the outer walls, which sounded oddly precise for a guess. This led to suspicion toward the old commandant, and the new theory mainly points towards some type of setup through which Diderici was either helped, escaped, or killed. The only problem with this is that even if his guess was precise, it was still backed by the fact that Diderici had attempted to escape in the past and was put in iron shackles to stop it from happening again. Either way, similar to the mystery, Diderici was never seen or heard from again. Conclusion, to be honest, I personally think this checks out perfectly, and while I did love the mystery and paranormal aspect to the original tale, it's great to see an actual mystery getting somewhat solved. But how is throwing this wild theory solving it? This is weird. There's no documentation or anything. So there would need to be some kind of a documentation whether or not all of these guards and prisoners really did give testimony that this is exactly what happened. I mean, maybe it was a kid that wrote this blog. I don't know. So yeah, there's really not much information on this story, which is also curious, but we can't take it that seriously without any kind of documentation here. Continuing on with the Mysterious Universe article, a similarly bizarre vanishing supposedly happened in 1873 in Leamington Spa, England. A shoemaker by the name of James Warson was out with his friends when he suddenly made a bet with them that he could run without stopping all the way to Coventry, which was a full 16 miles away. The friends did not have faith in Warson's ability to do this and readily took him up on the bet. In order to make sure he followed through, the friends allegedly followed Warson in a horse-drawn cart. Warson ran for a few miles without any problems, and his friends were starting to think they might actually lose the bet when he suddenly tripped on something in the road. The story goes that Warson pitched forward but never hit the ground, instead completely blinking out of existence right before his terrified friends' eyes. A police search turned up nothing, and this seems to be another case of someone who just spontaneously ceased to exist in full view of witnesses. Now, here's the thing. I mean, I'm going to see if there's any documentation on this. This is 1873, slightly more recent, but in these cases, like let's say the friends, there was some kind of an accident or the friends killed them or whatever, why would they draw more attention by claiming something supernatural like that happened? Does that seem weird? Or they're just totally not involved, made something up while drunk or under the influence of drugs, that's fine. But if they really did harm him themselves, would they make up something that outlandish? I mean, even if it did happen, I mean, everybody would think it was outlandish. Alright, so let's attempt to get to the bottom of this disappearance of James Warson. So some people believe that this is some kind of fictional story that was passed off as real, but of course, if it were a real story and someone wrote an account of it and then it couldn't be tracked down, of course later on, various coincidence theorists and scientism cultists who they would of course think it was fictional, even if it was real. On MINDSHOCK, of course, we're not going to hallucinate and presuppose. But here is a write-up from obscuran-legend.fandom.com on the disappearance of James Warson. Was a strange disappearance that allegedly happened September 3rd, 1873. An English man named James Warson supposedly disappeared into the thin air while walking ahead of a horse-drawn carriage. The tale, whose title is actually An Unfinished Race, is a short story written by a famed author and satirist, Ambrose Bierce, in 1873. It appeared in his book, Can Such Things Be?, in 1893, and then again in his 12-volume collected works in 1909. It also appears in the Bierce Tribute Anthology, Present at a Hanging, and Other Ghost Stories. Description: James Byrne Warson was a shoemaker who lived in Leamington, Warwickshire, England. He had a little shop in one of the byways leading off the road to Warwick. In his humble sphere, he was an esteemed and honest man, although like many of his class in English towns, he was somewhat addicted to drink. When in liquor, he would make foolish wagers. On one of these too frequent occasions, he was boasting of his prowess as a pedestrian and athlete, and the outcome was a match against nature. For a stake of 1 sovereign, he undertook to run all the way to Coventry and back, a distance of something more than 40 miles. This was on the 3rd day of September in 1873. He set out at once, the man with whom he had made the bet, whose name is not remembered, accompanied by Barham Wise, a linen draper, and a Hammerson Burns, a photographer, I think, following in a light cart or wagon. For several miles, Warson went on very well at an easy gait without apparent fatigue, for he had really great powers of endurance and was not sufficiently intoxicated to enfeeble them. The 3 men in the wagon kept a short distance in the rear, giving him occasionally friendly chaff or encouragement as the spirit moved them. Suddenly, in the middle of the roadway, not a dozen yards from them, and with their eyes full upon him, the man seemed to stumble, pitched headlong forward, uttered a terrible cry, and vanished. He did not fall to the earth, he vanished before touching it. No trace of him was ever discovered. After remaining at and about the spot for some time with aimless irresolution, the 3 men returned to Leamington, told their astonishing story, and were afterward taken into custody. But they were of good standing, had always been considered truthful, were sober at the time of the occurrence, and nothing ever transpired to discredit their sworn account of their extraordinary adventure, concerning the truth of which, nevertheless, public opinion was divided throughout the United Kingdom. If they had something to conceal, their choice of means is certainly one of the most amazing ever made by sane human beings. That's an interesting write-up. So, theories, fictional story presented as fact, in parentheses, confirmed. And I don't know how this was confirmed on Obscure and Legend, but trivia here, and this is very interesting. It is especially interesting to note that Ambrose Bierce himself also disappeared under mysterious circumstances. At the age of 77, he traveled to Mexico and eventually caught up with and joined the infamous revolutionary Pancho Villa. A letter from him dated December 26, 1913, addressed to his good friend Blanche Partington, alluded to his upcoming itinerary in its closing remark, quote, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination," end quote. He was never seen or heard from again. So that's curious. So he wrote this story about a strange disappearance, and then he disappeared. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't call it that strange. I mean, people get lost in revolutions all the time. So I don't know. So a more detailed write-up here is on BellaOnline.com, The Voice of Women, by Dina Budd, The Disappearance of James Byrne Warson. And there's some other details here. James Byrne Warson was a shoemaker by trade living in Leamington, Warwickshire, England. His friends and family were often annoyed by Warson's constant bragging about his advanced aptitude as a long-distance runner. One day in early September 1873, two of Warson's friends decided to provide Warson with an opportunity to verify his claims. What's also interesting in the slight differences in all these accounts. In other accounts, there were three, one of which, name unknown. In this one, there's just the two. Barham Wise and Hammerson Burns were respected citizens of Leamington. Wise was a dry good merchant and Burns a photographer. They challenged Warson to run non-stop from Leamington to Coventry, a distance of 40 miles. All my sources for this story indicate this distance is 40 miles, but my research shows it is actually closer to a mere 10 miles. Warson immediately accepted the challenge and jumped up to begin his mission. Wise and Burns followed a few yards behind in a horse-drawn cart, never allowing Warson to leave their sight. Although Warson had consumed alcohol prior to the start of his journey, he seemed to be running along just fine. He was enjoying himself, even laughing and joking with his companions as he ran. After several miles of this frolicsome behavior, suddenly in front of his friend's eyes, Warson appeared to trip and fall forward in the middle of the road, giving out a frightened cry, and disappeared into thin air before he even hit the ground. Wise and Burns were alarmed and confused as they found no trace of their friend. They immediately made their way back to Leamington as quickly as possible to report the local constables what they had witnessed. Initially arrested on charges of drunkenness, they were soon released as they were found to be sober. No motive was found for the two responsible citizens to have harmed their friend. A search was conducted of the area, but Warson was never seen again. Did Warson disappear into another dimension? Was he picked up by an alien force? Was he from another time era and suddenly whisked back to his own time? Did he stumble into a fairy circle? A theory of void spots of universal ether has also been offered as an explanation for unexplained disappearances by Dr. Maximilian Hearn, a scientist and author. He believes these spots only lasted a few seconds, but were, quote, capable of destroying any and all material elements that happened into them, end quote. And that is pretty curious. That is pretty curious indeed. Yet another more detailed write-up here is strangehistory.net. This was posted December 28, 2012. Long distance runner doesn't disappear in broad daylight. There is something fascinating about people just vanishing, perhaps particularly in those rare instances when people are actually watching them. Beach has recently been chasing after records for the following interesting case. We've taken enough words from the Examiner to give some kind of outline here. And this just basically went over the general account here of Warson, the bet, the run, the disappearance. So how can we explain this kind of event? The author of the Examiner notes, A theory of void spots of universal ether has also been offered. And this is, of course, the capability of destroying any and all material elements that happen into them. But what really happened to Warson? Well, the answer is that he was Bierst. And what does to be Bierst mean? Well, Ambrose Bierce is, of course, the short story writer who himself vanished mysteriously. Many years before, he wrote a story that was entitled An Unfinished Race, and that was included in his best short story collection, Present at a Hanging and Other Ghost Stories, 1918, put together post-mortem from various shorter works. It was originally written in 1893. Beach loves the way that Fortean material leaks effortlessly from fiction into fact and back again. He came across another example recently over at Bad Archaeology, a very amusing post. Also, just as an aside, Bierce wrote 3 short stories about people disappearing. An Unfinished Race, The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, and Charles Ashmore's Trail. The last is particularly terrifying and particularly familiar because Algernon Blackwood ripped it off shamelessly for his own entrance and exit. Talk about greedy reading. December 31st, 2012, Bobskin writes in, I was interested to read your recent blog on disappearances and how fictional stories can become reported as fact. You mentioned Ambrose Bierce and his story, The Difficulty of Crossing a Field, which can be found here, and Charles Ashmore's Trail here. As you may know, these stories appear to be the origin of a number of similar tales of disappearances that have been reported as factual occurrences in periodicals, books, and on the net. Often the character who vanished is a David Lang, Oliver Lurch, or Larch, or a David or Oliver Thomas in a version translocated to Wales. Huh, that is curious. Okay, so yeah, obviously there's a lot of fictional stories that are purported to be fact, but is it possible he knew of a real story like this or a similar story and he wrote it? I mean, again, this happened so long ago. It's not like today where social media can verify everybody's recording on their cell phone, so those guys would have probably had their phone out for this, and then if he disappeared into thin air, then of course there's editing, so it could be faked either way. So let's go back to the original article here on Mysterious Universe. So he mentioned James Warson here, which of course could just be a literary work of fiction. But continuing on, one of the more famous such cases of baffling sudden disappearances in the same era happened in 1890 to the French inventor Louis Le Prince, mostly known today for his contributions to cinema and as the first person to ever capture moving images on film. September 16th, 1890, Le Prince boarded a train to return to Paris after visiting his brother in Dijon. As the train rattled along on its way, Le Prince was seen checking in his luggage and entering his cabin, from which no one would see him leave during the rest of the journey. When the train reached Paris, Le Prince did not disembark, and a train conductor was sent to his room to rouse him, thinking he had merely fallen asleep in his cabin. When the cabin was opened, it was discovered that both Le Prince and his luggage were gone. A complete search of the train turned up no trace of the man or his belongings, and no one could be found who could recall Le Prince ever leaving this cabin once the train had departed. Since the train had made no stops between Dijon and Paris, he could not have gotten off anywhere, and the cabin windows had been closed and locked from the inside. Additionally, there was no sign of any foul play and no reports that anything had been amiss during the trip. Le Prince was simply gone. Interestingly, his disappearance would allow Thomas Edison to take credit for inventing motion pictures, even though Le Prince had already been in possession of plans for this invention long before, which he had been hoping to have patented in America, and would have if he had not gone missing. This is an interesting case of a mysterious disappearance actually shaping history as we know it. Now, the big red flag here is that the luggage was gone as well. It would be more mysterious, of course, if the luggage was not gone. Now, did he disembark and nobody noticed? Again, were all the witnesses interviewed? Were all of the train staff interviewed? Of course, there's no security camera footage here at the train station at this time. But it's definitely a curious case. Let's go a little deeper here. So let's see if we can solve this thing, because I found a few curious leads here. But first, let's go to the Wikipedia regarding his disappearance here. September 18th, 1990, Le Prince was preparing for a trip to the U.S., supposedly to publicly premiere his work and join his wife and children. Before this journey, he decided to return to France to visit his brother in Dijon. Then on September 16th, he took a train to Paris, but having taken a later train than planned, his friends missed him in Paris. He was never seen again by his family or friends. The last person to see Le Prince at the Dijon station was his brother. The French police, Scotland Yard, and the family undertook exhaustive searches but never found him. Le Prince was officially declared dead in 1897. A photograph of a drowned man pulled from the Seine in 1890, strongly resembling Le Prince, was discovered in 2003 during research in Paris police archives. The most likely explanation for his disappearance is thus that having failed to get his moving picture to work and now in debt, he chose to take his own life. Before the 2003 discovery, a number of wild and entirely unsubstantiated theories were proposed, including the patent wars assassination, Equity 6928. Christopher Rawlins pursues the assassination theory along with other theories and discusses the Le Prince family's suspicions of Edison over patents, the Equity 6928, in his 1990 book and documentary, The Missing Reel. Rawlins claims that at the time that he vanished, Le Prince was about to patent his 1889 projector in the UK and then leave Europe for his scheduled New York official exhibition. His widow assumed foul play, though no concrete evidence has ever emerged, and Rawlins prefers the suicide theory. In 1898, Le Prince's elder son Adolphe, who had assisted his father in many of his experiments, was called as a witness for the American Mutoscope Company in their litigation with Edison, Equity 6928. By citing Le Prince's achievements, Mutoscope hoped to annul Edison's subsequent claims to have invented the moving picture camera. Le Prince's widow, Lizzie, and Adolphe hoped that this would gain recognition for Le Prince's achievement, but when the case went against Mutoscope, their hopes were dashed. 2 years later, Adolphe Le Prince was found dead in Fire Island near New York. Wow, this does reek of conspiracy, does it not? Another theory, disappearance ordered by the family. In 1966, Jacques Delandes proposed a theory in History Comparée de Cinema, the comparative history of cinema, claiming that Le Prince voluntarily disappeared due to financial reasons and familial conveniences. Journalist Leo Sauvage quotes a note shown to him by Pierre Graz, director of the Dijon Municipal Library in 1977, that claimed Le Prince died in Chicago in 1898, having moved there at the family's request because he was a homosexual, but he rejects that assertion. There is no evidence to suggest that Le Prince was gay. Fratricide, murder for money theory. In 1967, Jean Mitry proposed in History de Cinema that Le Prince was killed. Mitry notes that if Le Prince truly wanted to disappear, he could have done so at any time prior to that. Thus, he most likely never boarded the train in Dijon. He also wonders why, if his brother, who was confirmed as the last person to have seen Le Prince alive, knew Le Prince was suicidal, he didn't try to stop Le Prince, and why he didn't report Le Prince's mental state to the police before it was too late. Now, it is curious, though, in Wikipedia, of course, part of the authority-worshipping cult, they wild and entirely unsubstantiated theories is called this. I mean, there's plenty of substantiation for the Thomas Edison one. I'm going to go into that in a moment, but first, let's examine the 2003 drowned man. So there's actually really not much information. I couldn't really find much on that, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that could be, there was no DNA test done or anything, so a lot of people were dying randomly at those times, so there's really no evidence that that was him. However, let's get into this. So, ScienceDirect.com has an issue here, Materials Today, Volume 11, Issues 7 to 8, July, August 2008, page 56, The Disappearance of Louis Le Prince. A 118-year-old mystery has resurfaced recently with new evidence that turned up in a New York library archive regarding the sudden disappearance of Louis Le Prince. Relatively unknown today, Louis Le Prince is the inventor, officially recognized as the first person to record motion images on film, giving birth to today's motion picture industry. In October 1888, Le Prince recorded a series of moving images from Leeds Bridge in Leeds, England. Several years before either Thomas Edison or the Lumiere brothers, Le Prince had been granted patents on both a 16-lens device and a single-lens type. Born on August 28, 1841, Louis Aimé Augustin Le Prince was the son of a respected officer of the Légion d'Honneur, a French order established by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1802. The elder Le Prince had some interesting friends, among them photography pioneer Daguerre, from whom his son Louis received photography and chemistry lessons. Later, Louis went on to an education at Paris and Leipzig universities, where he studied painting and chemistry. In 1866, Le Prince moved from France to England at the invitation of a college friend. 3 years later, Louis married his friend's sister, a talented artist. Together, the new husband and wife began a school of applied art named the Leeds Technical School of Art. Soon they were well renowned for their work combining photography on metal and ceramic. The family later moved to the U.S. for some years, while Louis managed a small group of French artists there. It was also in the U.S. that Le Prince began to build his 16-lens camera and experiment with film stock. On September 16, 1890, Louis Le Prince disappeared, never to be seen again. Le Prince had promised he would rejoin his friends in Paris for a return journey to England. However, he failed to arrive at the appointed time and was never seen again by his family or friends. This last sighting of him was on board a train leaving the Dijon platform. Though both French police and Scotland Yard carried out an exhaustive search for his body and luggage, neither was ever found and the case remained unsolved. Enter Alexis Bedford, a graduate student at the University of New York. Bedford, who is studying chemistry and photography, has been doing research into the history of motion pictures for the past year and a half. His search has often led him to the inner forgotten archives of the New York Library, which is where he made this discovery. I've always admired Louis Le Prince, stated Bedford, but really not much was known about him because of his sudden disappearance. As Bedford relates, he was turning over some papers on Thomas Edison's work with lighting methods when he stumbled across a dilapidated leather-bound book. The book would turn out to be one of many notebooks in which Edison was fond of jotting down ideas and test data. Leafing through it, explained Bedford, I merely thought I'd find perhaps some interesting and as of yet unknown processes that Edison had tried in the laboratory. I never thought I would stumble upon this. He had found a small entry dated September 20th, 1890 by Edison's own hand, which read, quote, Eric called me today from Dijon. It had been done. It has been done. Prince is no more. This is good news, but I flinched when he told me. Murder is not my thing. I'm an inventor, and my inventions for moving images can now move forward. End quote. Wow, that's pretty damning if that's in Thomas Edison's own handwriting. So this entry is dated September 20th, 1890, so of course they would have had to verify that, date it, but this is some damning information here. So what authority-worshipping cultists and coincidence theorists that call all these conspiracies unfounded, or, I mean, clearly there was motive because of the patents. Now, whether this is actually true or not, I mean, calling it wild and insane, like, this is what authority-worshipping cultists do, because they're too mentally weak to handle any kind of conspiracy to murder or otherwise, despite the fact that they're prosecuted every single day. Bedford, excited and puzzled by the entry, immediately went to chat to the librarian curator, Charlene Edmonds. Edmonds was unaware of the presence of the Edison Journal, but that's not surprising, she later stated. Our library contains such a large amount of historical documents, and some of them have been forgotten through the ages. I wouldn't be surprised at anything anyone found here. With Mrs. Edmonds' permission, Bedford took the journal back to New York University, where he put it in the care of historian Robert E. Meyer. After weeks of examining the journal to ascertain its authenticity, which includes penmanship comparison with known Edison articles and a computed tomography scan, Meyer agreed that the journal was indeed authentic and that the note dated September of 1890 was genuinely Edison's own. It is quite a different look at these amazing inventors in the time they lived in, said Bedford. Suddenly, we're seeing Thomas Edison in a different light as a person who had a strong stake in dominating the trademark industry, and we're seeing how the patent wars affected these scientists as they sought to garner attention for their inventions. This is very exciting, echoes Meyer. We are practically rewriting history with this evidence. And so this was back in 2008 that this was published, and it's curious because now, after the internet's gotten a lot more popular in recent years. I mean, it was definitely used in 2008, but again, not like today in the 2020s. So people are now more aware of Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and Edison's criminal ways, so it's a little less surprising. I mean, this actually doesn't shock me at all. I don't know about others, but yeah, this in 2022, this does not really seem that shocking, but in 2008, I bet it was very shocking. So yeah, Edison had this guy whacked for because of patent wars. Interesting. Very interesting. But in either way, that would not really qualify for missing 411, would it? All right, so that is the disappearances we'll cover in the 18th and 19th century. Obviously, there are way more, but we are making our way through specifically missing 411 cases, working up to more modern cases, which we'll be tackling in the next episode. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of MindShock True Crime. If you enjoyed the podcast, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Or if you prefer Patreon, patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You can also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. Questions, comments, theories, non-suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.